Hello everyone, I hope you are well. Today's story is about the pharaonic priestess who lived thousands of years ago. She was born in a town in South London in 1904 and died in Egypt in 1981. She spoke the language of the pharaohs and practiced their rituals, mastered hieroglyphics in 2 months. She fell in love with Pharaoh Seti I and sacrificed herself for him. She revealed the most important archaeological sites in Egypt hidden beneath tons of sand, translated hundreds of hieroglyphic texts and pharaonic inscriptions, and was buried near the Temple of Abydos, where she had lived for thousands of years. Within the lines of history, if one scrutinized closely, they would find many stories shrouded in mystery and secrets that were created with their owners, buried with them, and left scholars and logicians unable to explain or discover their mysteries. The British girl Dorothy Eddy, or Seti. At the age of 3, while playing, she had a fall from the stairs of her house and suffered a severe head injury that immediately rendered her unconscious. Her father summoned the doctor, and after examining her, the doctor confirmed that she had died as there were no vital signs indicating that she had been alive for more than half an hour. It was like a thunderbolt to her parents, although they expected it due to the violent shock she received. They left her in her room and busied themselves with preparing the medical report and arrangements for the funeral. While they were at it, they heard a noise in her room and went to check, only to find Dorothy playing with her toys normally, as if nothing had happened. This was a great surprise to everyone, as they no longer cared about the details. They were just satisfied that the girl hadn't died, or that life had returned to her. After a short period, Dorothy fully recovered from her injury, but she began to exhibit strange behaviors. She would utter incomprehensible words. With time, the condition developed, and during her visits to many doctors, they said it was a natural occurrence that could happen after a severe head injury, and this condition is called foreign accent syndrome. But what caught their attention was that the strange words seemed to form coherent and correct phrases, as if they were a real language. She also always repeated that she wanted to return to her home in her city, and when her parents told her that this was her home and this was her city, she would reject that and talk to them about a strange city, describing it in detail, and saying that her city had columns and huge statues, and a large garden with lots of fruit and workers. Those behaviors continued to develop over the following days and years. Dorothy was always talking about ancient religious rituals. With time and details, her parents discovered that these rituals were probably from ancient civilizations. Dorothy was 10 years old and still in this condition, so her father decided to take her to the British Museum to see her reaction. When they started wandering in the Egyptian antiquities section, Dorothy surprised everyone as she began to run in the halls, saying, "This is my homeland, and this is my people," and she started hugging and kissing the pharaonic statues in the hall. Then she reached the hall of the Temple of Abydos, where there was a large picture of the temple. She stood staring at it and said, "This place is my home, and I know it very well," and she wondered about the debris in the temple and about the garden that was behind it. Where is it? Also, when she saw the mummy of Pharaoh Seti I, she recognized him immediately and confirmed that she knew him personally. If this is your first visit to the channel, we are happy for you to subscribe to it so we can continue together. If you have any suggestions for similar topics, leave it for us in the comments and we can talk about it later. Dorothy spent all her time among Egyptian artifacts, behaving strangely. After that visit, Dorothy seized any opportunity to repeat her visit to the museum, to contemplate and delve deeper into Egyptian artifacts. Dorothy's repeated visits to the museum and her deepening involvement in the details sparked the curiosity of the English archaeologist Alice Badger in the antiquities section of the museum. Every time she discussed with her a little about her interest in Egyptian artifacts and encouraged her to study hieroglyphics and guided her to some sources, Dorothy told her that she knew this language well but forgot how to read it. Indeed, Dorothy began to learn hieroglyphics immediately and mastered it in record time, not exceeding 2 months. her obsession with ancient Egyptian civilization increased, and one day she told her parents that the god Horus had visited her in her dream and told her that someone from hell had found a way out. Not only that, but she also told her family that she had seen herself and a group of Egyptian women sleeping on straw mats in a large room, with a man carrying a lantern walking among them to make sure each one was in her place. During World War I, her mother sent her to her grandmother's house out of fear for her, and there the customs required her to attend Sunday school at the church. She began to compare between Christianity and the ancient Egyptian paganism, which she claimed to follow. Also, at school, she refused to sing a hymn calling for the curse of the pharaohs, so she was expelled, and her parents were summoned for interrogation by the priest. Dorothy remained interested in Egyptian affairs and antiquities and began to collect Egyptian historical and heritage photos and artifacts. She visited all the Egyptian museums she could until fate played its role, and she got a job at a magazine in London in the field of Egyptian public relations. At the age of 27, during this period, she met her future husband, Imam Abdul Majid, in 1931, who was Egyptian and studying English in Britain. The relationship between them developed, and he asked her in marriage. Dorothy agreed without hesitation, especially since she knew he would return to Egypt, so it was an opportunity not to be missed for Dorothy. In 1933, after marriage, they moved to live in Egypt, and upon her arrival at the port of Port Said in Egypt, she knelt on the ground, kissed the soil, and said, "I have returned to my land, I have returned to my homeland." She lived in Cairo, where she gave birth to her child and named him Seti after the pharaoh she claimed to know and live in his time. The nightmares and strange dreams continued to haunt Dorothy during her stay in Cairo, becoming more frequent. She began to dream constantly that she found herself in a place resembling a prison, surrounded by a large group of people who interrogated and tortured her while wearing the clothes of ancient Egyptians. Those people around her wore ancient Egyptian attire. She told her husband and his family about those dreams. Those strange dreams did not stop there but began to dream that the ancient Egyptian god Horus came to her every night to tell her information about her and her previous life. He told her that her name was Bintrishit and that she lived 3,000 years ago during the reign of Seti I. Her father was a soldier, and her mother was a vegetable seller. After her mother's death, and she was 3 years old at the time, her father did not have enough time to take care of her, so he gave her to the Abydos temple. When Dorothy heard her ancient name, she remembered many details about her previous life in ancient Egypt, as she says, about her family and her life in the Abydos temple, where she spent her childhood and youth. When she reached the age of 14, her life took a turn when she was given the choice as a priestess in Abydos either to leave the temple and live her normal life or to remain a priestess in the temple for the rest of her life, and she had to swear allegiance and not leave it or marry completely. She chose to continue her life as a priestess in the temple. There, that beautiful girl attracted the attention of the young King Seti I during his visits to the temple, and he fell in love with her. The relationship between them developed until she became pregnant with the king's child. The temple priests summoned her and interrogated her, starting to torture her, but she refused to confess that King Seti was her lover to avoid tarnishing his reputation. Meanwhile, Egypt was experiencing internal political turmoil. The priests insisted on extracting a confession from her regarding her relationship with Seti I, so she decided to commit suicide to prevent any harm to Seti I's political future. As events and dreams with Dorothy progressed to this extent, her husband, after informing her family of what was happening, decided to transfer her to a mental hospital. However, she was quickly discharged from the hospital, with doctors confirming she was perfectly healthy. In 1935, Dorothy's husband, Imam Abdul Majid, was offered a teaching position in Iraq and intended to travel with his family. However, Dorothy insisted on staying in Egypt, leading to their divorce. She remained with her son, Seti, and moved from Cairo to the village of Nazlat as-Saman near the pyramids, where she practiced ancient Egyptian religious rituals and spent nights in front of the pyramids, performing strange prayers that astonished the local residents. The Egyptian archaeology expert, Dr. Salim Hassan, was excavating with his team in the same area when he heard her story. He arranged a meeting with her and was impressed by her extensive knowledge of hieroglyphics and her wide-ranging knowledge of antiquities in the Pharaonic era. He decided to employ her as a draftsman in his team to document the artifacts and archaeological discoveries. Later, she also worked with Dr. Ahmed Fakhri's team, an expert in archaeology, during his excavation in the Dashur area. In 1956, after Dr. Ahmed Fakhri's excavation project ended, he offered her the opportunity to join his team to work at the Cairo Museum with a very good salary. However, she chose to move to live in the village of Arba Abydos near the Abydos Temple, her old home, as she claimed. No one believed her stories until new inscriptions were discovered, so Dorothy translated them to reveal more archaeological sites later. Her rare knowledge of hieroglyphics, signs, and symbols helped her secure a new job at the Abydos Temple with the Egyptian Antiquities Authority. Over time, Dorothy's fame grew among those interested in archaeology, and her knowledge expanded, and her connections widened. Dorothy's discoveries at the Abydos Temple began from her early days at work. She drew a map of the temple hall and identified a location where she claimed there was an entrance to a secret tunnel leading to passages and rooms under the temple that needed to be excavated. Initially, the officials refused outright, but she insisted, and with the help of several archaeologists she had previously met, and with the assistance of the archaeologist Kenneth Kitchen, she obtained approval and permits for excavation. They began digging at the designated location and indeed found the secret tunnel in the same place and in the same form she had described. Dorothy continued her discoveries, insisting on the existence of a large garden behind the temple, accurately drawing it and confirming that she first met King Seti I in this garden. This was the same garden she mentioned at the museum in London, saying there used to be a garden here. Indeed, they excavated the garden and found the columns and artifacts as she had drawn and described them before, after removing tons of sand covering them for thousands of years. One of Dorothy's greatest and most important discoveries was the secret chambers in the Valley of the Kings, where she drew a map of the area indicating passages and secret rooms beneath. Additionally, she depicted the location of several tombs adjacent to the chambers, including the tomb of a very important political figure, as she mentioned. However, she did not disclose the name of that individual because, as she claimed, they were deeply disliked by the ruling family, who deliberately concealed the tomb in this remote location. Dorothy died before the excavation process began at that site. Several years later, the team began excavating in that tomb and found the tomb of Tutankhamun and discovered many artifacts and evidence of the presence of Queen Nefertiti's tomb. It is most likely that Queen Nefertiti is the important figure Dorothy referred to in her remarks because she was one of the most powerful queens of Egypt. Her name was repeatedly mentioned in historical records for years before suddenly disappearing completely from historical documents, as if intentionally concealed by the ruling family that governed. Like her ancient Egyptian predecessors, Dorothy prepared for death to journey to the afterlife and meet the gods. Over the course of several years, she built her own underground tomb, inscribing pharaonic prayers on its walls to facilitate her journey to the gods. After 25 years at the Abydos Temple, Dorothy Eddy, the English woman who lived with the spirit of an ancient Egyptian priestess, died. Her request to be buried in her prepared tomb was denied by the Egyptian authorities for health reasons. Since Dorothy was not mummified like the pharaohs, her body would naturally decompose. Therefore, she was buried elsewhere. Undoubtedly, the life of the British girl Dorothy was full of puzzles and mysteries from beginning to end. Many hypotheses and claims revolved around her. Nevertheless, she made significant discoveries and contributions to human civilization and history through her Egyptian archaeological findings. She translated important hieroglyphic inscriptions, documented archaeological sites, shed light on the lost pharaonic culture through its rituals and worship, revived the ancient Egyptian calendar, and practiced healing rituals as an Egyptian priestess. A lot of patients sought treatment through ancient Egyptian incantations as she represented a pharaonic priestess, especially since the city of Abydos was a religious city dedicated to the worship of the god Osiris, the god of the dead and the afterlife, and the guardian of eternal life. Dorothy remained loyal to her civilization and her ancient people, just as she was loyal to her lover, Pharaoh Seti I, and sacrificed herself for his political future and the interests of her people. It is worth noting, dear listener, not to forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel before going to sleep so that you do not become subject to the interrogation of the priests of the Abydos temple. Thank you very much.